Joining us now, Commander KP Sanjeev Kumar. We privileged to have Commander KP Sanjeev Kumar with us. He's a former naval aviator and a test pilot. Commander Kumar, thank you very much for being with us. We are also joined by Lieutenant General Syed Ata Hasnain, the former General Officer Commanding of the 15 Corps. But Commander KP Sanjeev Kumar, in a hilly situation where there is a fog, what are some of the basic checks that an experienced aviator would be going through in terms of flying?
Thank you. Good evening, Vishnu and the other panelists. Thank you for having me on the show, and I hope we were speaking of better things. Coming to your question, when you're flying in the hills, typically like this sortie was undertaken, these flights are purely conducted under visual flight rules, which means that the helicopter and the crew have to fly in accordance with the visual flight rules, which means that they have to be in contact with the ground at all times. They have to have clearance from cloud, clearance from terrain maintained visually. So there are minimas laid down, like typically for the flight that was being undertaken. You would not fly in the hills with a reported visibility less than 1.5 kilometers. However, there can be local changes. There is nobody giving them a minute-by-minute update on the weather. They would have checked the weather before they took off. They would be en route. They would be in communication with the helipad. But there could be sudden changes in weather, which is very typical for Coonoor at this time of the year, when you could have one valley which is absolutely clear and the next one which is full of clouds, or you could be just flying and clouds just rolling down the mountains. So precautions in this case and I'm not suggesting that this accident happened because of low visibility, but one would always be wary of entering hills when you cannot see where you're heading, and when you cannot see below you, you cannot see what's around you. So radar would be on, the GPS would be on. The Mi-17V5 is fairly advanced. It's got a moving map display, so the non-flying pilot would be monitoring the aircraft's ground movement and position. There is no synthetic vision system in the V5. There is no ground proximity warning system either. So it has to be purely visual. And there's only so much room available to maneuver. While you are proceeding on a predetermined route, there is very little diversion or deviation possible. So the primary precaution in this case would be just avoid contact with bad weather. Right.
And that's evidently something which didn't happen, and that's unfortunate. I just want to go across to General Ata Hasnain. General, it's such a sad day today, and what we've been speaking about, and I wanted to get your views over the last few hours, besides these officers themselves, are their families, because we are seeing children as well, and there's this stoic, poignant sort of effort by all of them to be there and to deal with this situation. How important are families for our armed forces?
Vishnu, Jai Hind to everyone. I wish again we were speaking in better times. As to the families, that's the question regarding families. Families are a part of the armed forces. For example, I can tell you that when we convey greetings to units, we always convey greetings to the commanding officer, the officers, the JCOs, the men, and the families. It's always included. The families are never detached from units or subunits or formations, etc. It's a part and parcel of our existence. In peace stations in particular, also in field areas, are concerned for the families. You can't have Jawans serving with you in places like the line of control or in the Rashtra Rifle sectors, areas under deep threat, with the anguished Jawans who have got problems regarding their families at home. This is something which is a part of our command responsibility, an officer's command responsibility, a JCO's command responsibility, to make sure that the welfare of his men includes fully the welfare of the families. The moment a unit comes into a peace station, the accommodation which you get there is every effort to ensure that there is fair and square distribution of the accommodation for the required amount of time, education of the children. In fact, these are very rare occasions when Jawans get about 2 to 3 years and sometimes even less than that to educate their children in proper schools.
Yeah.
Today, of course, we are also concerned about separated families. So, as I said before, the families are a part and parcel of us, and on occasions such as this, I've had the experience many times from Kashmir, for example, the conveyance of bad news to the families is not done in just any other way. It has to be done through a protocol, a proper sensitive protocol, which was adopted, I think, about 20-25 years ago. Prior to that, I do admit there were ways which were very, very insensitive perhaps. But today, we are extremely sensitive about these things.
Yeah. Commander, the flight data recorder has been found. The cockpit voice recorder has been found. It's all mistakenly called a black box. In fact, if anything, it's orange in color, as I understand it, so that it can be found quite easily. How soon, assuming it's not damaged, could these be decrypted, as a first step? Commander.
Yes. So it depends to an extent about what is the material state of the black box, because from the visuals that I've seen, it has been a very horrific crash. Typically, the black box or the CVR and FDR is placed in a location on the aircraft which will survive most crashes. So if the contents of the black box are intact, then it's just a matter of downloading the information and decoding. And in certain cases, help from the original equipment manufacturer, in this case the Russians, may be required. But I doubt it. If it has been recovered intact, then I think within a week's time we should be onto it. However, now that the code of inquiry has been constituted, they will be going through it as per a protocol. And I don't personally expect a day-by-day blow by blow account of what's going on in the investigation, but yes, there will be very crucial evidence forthcoming from the black box.
Commander, final question to you: the Mi-17 V5, is it a safe helicopter?
100%. There's no doubt about that. I saw some conspiracy theories floating here and there. You see the accident history. There have been about 5 crashes. The V5. We have about 150 of them. You imagine then a quantum of flying. So accidents are not measured in pure numbers of how many accidents. It's how many accidents per million hours or per X number of hours. There's a rate. And you have to also see the causative factors for the accidents. We can't call it an unsafe helicopter if somebody flies it into the ground. Accidents don't happen for a single reason either. These are highly advanced helicopters with most of the advanced avionics on board, including flight director autopilot systems. The helicopter can be flown hands off. It is cleared for all-weather flying. The senior most, the commanding officer himself was flying. I have very little to doubt that there is anything unsafe that is going on. I have written about such cases in the past. You see, the only solution to preventing unplanned encounter with weather is to completely avoid that. And I'm not talking about this crash in particular. When you're operating the hills, there is very little margin for any kind of error, any kind of failure. Even a partial failure, power loss can put you into trouble, because you're limited by performance, you're limited by the clearances around you. So I don't think the helicopter can be termed unsafe based on 5 accidents or 6 accidents in the past. Helicopters fly over 30 to 40 years. We have to. The accident investigation will determine the causative factors. The Flight Safety Department of the Air Force will have a sure handle on the statistics, and I'm nobody to call this helicopter unsafe.
Sure. No, and you're absolutely right. It's because there's a lot of misinformation that unsafe helicopter. That's not the case, and I'm glad that you've made the points that you are making. General, let me come back to General Ata Hasnain. Your interaction or your engagement with General Bipin Rawat, could you share something personal, that you remember? Did you disagree with him ever?
Well, Vishnu, we had a very long association. Some commonalities. Both of us are second generation. Both our fathers were general officers of the Indian Army. Both of us got commissioned into our father's units. So there was a lot of common ground there. And I'll start with the last part. When I took over 15 Corps, Baramulla division, the Dagger division, was falling vacant. And although you don't get a chance to ask for the GOC yourself on your choice, I took up the case with General VK Singh, requested him that General Bipin Rawat, who was then a brigadier, should be posted. And that was agreed to. He came and commanded the same division which I had commanded. It's not easy commanding a division which your boss has commanded some earlier. But let me admit in public today, he commanded the division better than I did. And earlier he had replaced me in the MS branch in the same appointment which I occupied as the person looking after policy. Again, I want to wish to say that he did the job far better than I did.
Yep.
So we've had a tremendous amount of interaction, both of us. I can tell the public this very clearly, that as a brigade commander, I saw him as a sector commander in Sopore. We used to interact every day there, conduct our operations and synchronize operations there. You never found him in his office. He was always on the move. Always on the move, somewhere, some corner of his sector where he was undertaking reconnaissance, meeting people, carrying out operations. That's the kind of dynamism, that's the kind of energy which he brought to his job. And I wish to say this, I think right till the end, I met him barely 8 or 9 days ago in a wedding. And there again the same thing, he came, we hugged each other and recalled good times together. There were times when he rang me up early in the morning at about 7 o'clock. When something was troubling him, something particularly about Kashmir, and he wanted to sort of confess it and discuss with me. Those are great moments, because I thought, here's a man who does not think he knows everything himself. He always wishes to consult, look at people, go back to past experiences. Not easy for a man at a 4-star rank, at a second stage of a 4-star rank, to come back, go back to the old veterans, his friends, and ask them for advice. It takes a tremendous amount of gumption to do that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, it does indeed. Well, just for the benefit of our viewers, let me just run you through what has been happening today. These caskets were brought back from Coonoor earlier on in the day to Sulur. That's the Indian Air Force Air Base in the Coimbatore area. It was flown from there back to Delhi. Yesterday there was a devastating helicopter crash, 13 of 14 people on board an Indian Air Force Mi-17 V5 helicopter, including the Chief of Defence Staff, General Bipin Rawat, the senior most military official in India, along with his wife, Mrs. Madhulika, she was on board. Madhulika Rawat was on board. A senior brigadier, cleared for the rank of Major General. Brigadier Lider was there, a Lieutenant Colonel, all staff officers to the Chief of Defence Staff, along with his personal security officers, all para special forces commandos. They were all killed. In addition to that, there is a group captain of the Indian Air Force who is fighting for his life. He'd gone down from the Defence Services Staff College in Wellington to receive the Chief of Defence Staff, and he was also on that helicopter. He is now fighting for his life, a Shaurya Chakra winner at the Command Hospital in Bengaluru, where he has severe injuries. He's critical but stable is the last that we have heard. In addition to him, the flight crew of that Mi-17 V5 helicopter, including the pilot, the co-pilot, the flight engineer, and a couple of junior warrant officers the names keep flashing on the screen over there. All of them were on board that helicopter, accompanying the Chief of Defence Staff to the Defence Services Staff College in Wellington. Just a quick question, General Atta Hasnain, as I begin to wrap this up. What is the defense, for the benefit of our viewers, what does the Defence Services Staff College actually do? What is the role that it plays? Could you just share this for our viewers who may not know?
Thank you, Vishnu. This is one of the most prestigious institutions of the Indian Army. Let me tell you the origins of this institution. First, it used to exist in Quetta. After the partition, the Quetta repart remained with Pakistan, and the Pakistan Defence Services Staff College came up there, and the Indian Army's Staff College shifted to Wellington. 19th of August 1948 is the precise date on which this was inaugurated. This is an institution which runs an approximately 10-month-long course for all 3 services. This is one of the few institutions which has all 3 services present in it at the same time, integrated, working together. They have got 3 separate divisions, 3 separate divisions of the Army Service, the Navy and the Air Force, but they come together several times for war games, discussions, etc. The prime purpose here is not operations. Operations is the backdrop. It is the essence is to teach staff work. Now, this for our viewers is very important for you to know that the amount of detail that the armed forces have to go into is actually requires training for the staff to know how to go into those details, how to present them to the commanders in the chain so that they can take their decisions correctly. The commanders in the chain must never be saddled with too much detail. That too much detail must remain with the staff officers, and the correct amount of detail should be put up to the decision makers for their decisions. That's the best way staff work always works. So this is what is the purpose of the staff college. You have a competitive exam in the Indian Army, similarly in the other services, which you are permitted to take 3 times altogether. And it's a selection course. When you pass this course, you are nominated to attend there. It's one of the very prestigious courses. Against your name, you put PSC at the end of the course. It's called Pass Staff College. Pass Staff College. PSC. So Wellington is one of those institutions. On a personal note, if I may say, I've been there many, many times. As a child with my parents when they were in staff college as instructors and as deputy commandant. I was a student there myself, and I went and became a directing staff there personally. 5 times that one has had virtual postings in Wellington. It's a fascinating place and a great learning institution.
All right. Well, General, thank you very much for being with us. So tomorrow is again going to be another day. We're going to be seeing a lot of solemn ceremony. It's going to be starting in the morning when civilians will be allowed to pay their last respects to the Chief of Defence Staff at his residence at 3 Kamraj Marg. It will be regulated entry into that house. Then there will be defence officials who will be allowed to go in over there as well.